Some children are born to build empires. Others are born to watch. My father's voice cut through the silence of his Connecticut dining room as he handed my brother a check for $10 million. Every eye at that table turned to me, the daughter he just publicly declared worthless. But here's what Warren Ashford didn't know as he stood there in his $1,000 suit, basking in the applause: I'd already built my empire. And the letter sitting in my apartment, the one from his dead father, was about to burn his entire world to ash. Father, I said, setting down my wineglass with deliberate calm. That's very generous of you. I'm sure Garrett will put it to good use. My mother looked relieved. My brother smirked. And my father, Warren Ashford, the great investment banker, actually seemed surprised by my graciousness. I'm glad you understand, sweetheart, he said, his voice dripping with pity. Not everyone is cut out for high finance. No, I agreed, my smile never faltering. Not everyone is. What happened 72 hours later would make Connecticut business circles explode. When I walked into his study with my laptop and a stack of legal documents, when I connected to his television screen and showed him exactly who his dumb daughter really was, well, let's just say the empire builder discovered he'd been building on sand while the watcher had constructed something on bedrock. My name is Nora Ashford, and I'm 29 years old. This is the story of how 27 years of being called the slow one ended with my father and brother confessing their frauds in front of 300 of Connecticut's wealthiest residents, and it all started with a letter from the grave. Welcome, everyone. If you're new here, welcome to Revenge with Alice, where we share stories about standing your ground when the people who should love you try to tear you down. And to my incredible subscribers, thank you. Every single like, comment, and share tells me these stories matter to you, and that means everything. Before we begin, I want to say a quick prayer for each of you watching, how you find the strength to see your own worth, even when others refuse to acknowledge it. May you have the courage to build your dreams in silence when the noise tries to diminish you. May you experience breakthrough in those areas where you've been overlooked, and may you know deep in your soul that your value is not determined by those who cannot see it. May protection surround you, peace fill you, and prosperity find you. Amen. Now, let's go back to where this really began. I was 7 when I first understood I was disappointing. It was a Tuesday evening, and I'd rushed home from school clutching my report card. 3 A's and 3 B's. I'd worked so hard for those grades, staying up past bedtime with my multiplication flashcards, rewriting my book reports until my hand cramped. I burst through the front door of our house. Dad! Dad, look! My father was in his study, my brother Garrett hovering beside him with his own report card. Garrett was 10, and everything about him seemed to shine brighter than me. His hair perfectly combed, his school uniform without a wrinkle, his smile confident in a way mine never was. What is it, Nora? My father asked without looking up from Garrett's paper. My report card. I thrust it toward him. I got 3 A's. He finally glanced at it, and I watched something shift in his expression. Not pride. Something else. Something that made my stomach hurt. 3 A's, he repeated slowly. Then he held up Garrett's report card. Your brother got 6th. I tried really hard, Nora. He set both report cards on his desk, side by side. The visual comparison was crushing. You try so hard, sweetheart. I can see that. It's just... He sighed, the kind of sigh that would become the soundtrack of my childhood. It's just a shame that effort doesn't always translate to results, but I did better than last time, and we're proud of that improvement. My mother's voice came from the doorway. Patricia Ashford stood there in her tennis outfit, fresh from the country club. Aren't we, Warren? Of course. My father turned back to Garrett. Now, son, about this science project. I think we should aim for the state competition. Their conversation continued as if I'd disappeared. I stood there holding my report card, the 3 A's I'd been so proud of suddenly feeling like 3 failures. That night at dinner, Garrett sat at my father's right hand. I sat at the far end of the table, barely within conversation range. Nora, my mother said, passing the vegetables. You'll need to try harder next semester. Your brother's setting quite the standard, I know, I whispered. Garrett looked at me across the table, and there was no malice in his expression. Just certainty. He knew, even then, that the hierarchy had been established. Winner. Loser. Smart one. Dumb one. And at 7 years old, I learned to accept my role. Nora, honey, we need to talk about high school. I was 12, and my parents had called me into my father's study. Garrett had just gotten his acceptance letter to the prestigious Ashford Preparatory School, the same private academy where my father and grandfather had gone. Am I going to Ashford Prep too? I asked, hope flickering despite knowing better. My father and mother exchanged a glance. We think, my father began carefully, that you might be happier at Lincoln Public High School, but Garrett goes to Ashford. Garrett has different aptitudes. My father's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. Ashford Prep is very competitive, very demanding. We don't want to set you up for failure, sweetheart. I won't fail. Our grades are be average, Nora. My mother leaned forward. That's fine for a public school, but Ashford requires excellence. We just think you'd be more comfortable somewhere less pressured. Translation, you're not smart enough. What if I study harder? My voice cracked. What if this isn't about effort, my father interrupted. Some children are naturally gifted academically. Others have different strengths. There's no shame in that. But there was shame. I felt it burning in my chest, saw it reflected in the way they looked at me, not with cruelty, but with pity. As if I was a problem to be managed rather than a daughter to be believed in. Okay, I said quietly. Lincoln is fine. Relief washed over their faces. That's our girl, my father said. Always reasonable. That became my other label. The reasonable one who didn't make waves, didn't demand more than she deserved, didn't reach for things beyond her grasp. Garrett got Ashford Prep. I got Lincoln Public. The message was clear. Nora Ashford, 3.4 grade point average. The principal's voice boomed across the graduation ceremony as I walked across the stage. I heard my mother's polite applause, my father's single clap. They'd been much louder for Garrett 3 years ago when he graduated with a 4.0. At the family dinner afterward, Garrett was home from Yale for the weekend, already looking like he belonged in an Ivy League catalog with his polo shirt and effortless confidence. So, Nora, my father said, cutting his steak. Have you given more thought to community college? I think that 2-year program in hospitality management could be perfect for you, actually, I said, my heart pounding. I got accepted to State University. For their computer science program. Silence, then my father made that sound, half laugh, half sigh, that I'd learned to dread. Computer science? Nora, those programs are extremely rigorous. The mathematics alone. I got accepted, I repeated. I can do this, sweetheart. My mother's hand covered mine. Your father and I just want to make sure you're being realistic about your capabilities. Maybe start with something more manageable? State University is manageable, I said. It's not Yale. No, Garrett interrupted, his tone light but pointed. It's definitely not Yale, but it's a good school, I pressed on. And I want to go. My father set down his knife and fork. Fine. If you want to waste time and money proving a point, that's your choice. But don't expect us to fund 4 years of struggle. State University it is. He paused. Well, at least it's affordable. The way he said affordable, like I was a discount item, a budget alternative to his real investment. I'll work, I said. I'll pay my own way. Character building, my father said with a nod. See, Patricia? Maybe this will be good for her after all. She'll learn the value of realistic expectations. Garrett smirked into his wine glass. My mother looked relieved I hadn't pushed for more, and I sat there, my high school diploma still crisp in my bag, making a decision that would change everything. I would prove them wrong. But I would do it in complete silence. They wanted to believe I was the dumb one? Fine. Let them believe it. While they watched Garrett shine, I would build something they couldn't even imagine. The computer science building at State University was nothing like the glossy Yale brochures Garrett used to leave around the house. It was a squat brick structure with flickering fluorescent lights and white boards covered in equations that looked like alien languages. I loved it immediately. Miss Ashford? Professor Raymondson stood at his office door, reviewing the project proposal I'd submitted. He was maybe 50, with graying hair and the kind eyes I hadn't realized I'd been desperate to see. Do you have a moment? Of course, Professor. His office was cramped, filled with tech magazines and half-built computer components. He gestured to a chair piled with papers. Just move those anywhere. I wanted to discuss your final project proposal. My stomach tightened. Is something wrong with it? Wrong? He looked genuinely surprised. No, Miss Ashford. It's excellent. This data analysis algorithm you're proposing, the one that optimizes inventory for small businesses, have you considered developing this into something commercial? I blinked. Commercial? Your approach is innovative. The way you've structured the predictive modeling, how you account for seasonal variations and market trends. He leaned forward. Miss Ashford, you have an instinct for problem solving that can't be taught. This could be more than a class project. Something unfamiliar bloomed in my chest. It took me a moment to recognize it. Validation. I don't know anything about commercial development, I admitted. Then let me introduce you to someone who does. He pulled out his phone. Andrea Kim. She was one of my students a decade ago. Now she's a venture capitalist specializing in tech startups. Would you be comfortable if I shared your proposal with her? Would I be comfortable? I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Yes, I said. Please, Professor Chen smiled. One more thing, Miss Ashford. I've reviewed your grades, your work ethic, the recommendations from your other professors. You're one of the most naturally gifted programmers I've seen in 20 years of teaching. I must have looked skeptical because he continued, I'm serious. Whatever made you doubt your abilities, whatever made you end up at State instead of Forgive Me somewhere that probably would have fought to recruit you, I'm glad it brought you here. This department is lucky to have you. I sat in that cramped office, surrounded by computer parts and textbooks, and felt something shift. Maybe my family was wrong. Maybe I wasn't the dumb one after all. That night, I called home. My father answered, Nora. How's school? Not struggling too much with the coursework, I hope? Actually, Dad, it's going really well. I have this computer project, an algorithm I'm developing, and my professor thinks it could be commercial. He's introducing me to a venture capitalist. That's nice, sweetheart. His voice was already distracted. Maybe it'll help you find a husband who works in tech. Those boys probably don't have many opportunities to meet nice girls. The validation Professor Chen had given me withered. Maybe, I said quietly. Garrett just called, by the way. He's been selected for some prestigious Yale economics club. Very exclusive. Only 10 students chosen. I'm flying up next weekend for the induction ceremony. That's great anyway. You keep working on your little project. It's good that you have hobbies. Character building, remember? After he hung up, I sat on my dorm room bed, staring at my project notes. Little project. Hobby. Character building. That was the moment I decided I would never tell them again. They'd given me a role in the family story, the struggling daughter, the one who tried so hard but just couldn't measure up to brilliant Garrett. If that was the only story they could see, then that was the story I'd let them keep, but I would build something real. Something mine. Something they'd never know about until it was too big to diminish. Nora Ashford, Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, cum laude. I walked across the stage in my cap and gown, my diploma representing 4 years of 18-hour days, 2 part-time jobs, and nights when I fell asleep at my laptop. Cum laude. High honors. Top 10% of my class. My parents were in the audience somewhere. They'd come, I had to give them that much. But when I met them after the ceremony, my father was already checking his watch. Congratulations, honey, my mother said, giving me a brief hug. We're so proud you finished. Not graduated with honors. Just finished, like I'd barely crossed a finish line everyone else had sprinted past. Thanks, Mom. We need to head out soon, my father said. Garrett's flying in from his Yale graduation tomorrow, and your mother wants to prepare the house. His ceremony was much longer, all those academic honors, so we couldn't attend both. You understand. Of course, I said. What I didn't tell them, by graduation day, my algorithm had already been licensed to 3 companies. I had $12,000 in the bank from licensing fees. And Andrea Kim, the venture capitalist Professor Chen had introduced me to, was helping me draft papers to incorporate my own company. So, what now? My father asked. Job hunting? I can reach out to some connections, see if anyone needs an entry-level person for data entry, or I have some opportunities I'm exploring, I said vaguely. Well, don't be too picky. In this economy, any job is a good job. And you don't have Garrett's credentials, so you might need to start at the bottom. I understand. My father patted my shoulder. That's my reasonable girl. Always practical about your limitations. They left 20 minutes later, rushing back to prepare the house for Garrett's triumphant return from Yale. I stood in the parking lot, diploma in hand, and made a call. Andrea? It's Nora Ashford. About that incorporation paperwork, let's do it. I'm ready to launch Cascade Analytics. On the other end of the line, Andrea laughed with delight. There's the entrepreneur I've been waiting to hear. When can you start? I looked at my diploma, my high honors cord, the evidence of everything I'd accomplished that my family had barely acknowledged. Right now, I said. I'm starting right now. Cascade Analytics. I chose the name deliberately. No Ashford to trade on family connections I didn't have, no Sullivan, my middle name, to link me to anyone. Just Cascade. A word meaning a succession of stages, each feeding into the next, building toward something powerful. That's what I was building. Stage by stage. In complete silence, Andrea helped me rent a small office space in Manhattan. 2 rooms, barely more than a closet, but it was mine. My first employee was a developer named James who'd been working dead-end freelance gigs. My second was a business analyst named Rita who saw potential in what I was creating. You really think this can work? Rita asked during our first official meeting. The big firms already dominate business analytics. They dominate enterprise clients, I said, pulling up my pitch deck. But there are thousands of small and medium businesses that can't afford the big firm rates. They need smart analytics, but they need it affordable and customized. That's our market. By my 23rd birthday, we had secured our first Fortune 500 client. The contract came through a referral from Andrea's network, a major retail chain looking to optimize their regional inventory distribution. They'd tried the big firms and found them too expensive and inflexible. Cascade Analytics proposed a pilot program. 6 months, 3 test locations, results-driven pricing that we delivered in 4 months with results that exceeded their projections by 40%. The contract was worth $200,000. Our portion after costs, $60,000. I sat in my small office, looking at the wire transfer confirmation, and wanted to call my father. Wanted to say, see? I'm not the dumb one. I built this. Me, but I didn't call. Because I knew what would happen. He'd find some way to minimize it, to explain it away, to make it smaller than it was. And I couldn't afford to let him back into my head. Instead, I called Professor Chen. Nora. How's the company doing? We just landed our first Fortune 500 client. Silence. Then, Nora Ashford, are you telling me your little startup just secured a 6-figure contract? Yes, sir. That's extraordinary. Congratulations doesn't even cover it. Do you realize what you've accomplished? I did. And finally, I was starting to believe I deserved it. Miss Ashford, the conference room is ready for the board meeting. Rita stood at my office door. We'd moved locations twice in 2 years, each office larger than the last. Now we occupied the entire 15th floor of a midtown Manhattan building. 50 employees. 3 locations. Contracts with 12 Fortune 500 companies. Cascade Analytics was thriving, and my family still thought I did computer stuff. I straightened my blazer and grabbed my tablet. How many people are we presenting to? 8 executives from Henderson Manufacturing. They're looking to overhaul their entire supply chain analytics. If we land this, it's a 3-year, $5 million contract. $5 million. I was 25 years old. The presentation went flawlessly. By the time I walked them through our predictive modeling capabilities, the CEO was leaning forward, asking questions that told me he was already sold. Miss Ashford, he said as we concluded. I've worked with the major consulting firms McKinsey, Bain, Deloitte. Your approach is more sophisticated than anything they've offered, and at a fraction of the cost. How did you develop this methodology? Trial and error, I said honestly. And a lot of late nights. He laughed. I'll have our legal team draw up the contract. Welcome to the Henderson family, Cascade Analytics. After they left, my team erupted in celebration. James popped a bottle of champagne someone had optimistically kept in the office fridge. To Nora. Rita raised her glass. The CEO who built this company from nothing, from a $5,000 investment and a dream, James added. Now look at us. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother, family dinner this Sunday. Your father has news. Don't be late. I stared at the message while my team celebrated around me. Sunday dinner's the monthly ritual where I sat at the far end of the table, barely acknowledged, while Garrett's career milestones dominated conversation. Everything okay, boss? James asked. Fine, I said, pocketing my phone. Just family stuff. Rita gave me a knowing look. I'd mentioned once, during a late-night working session, that my family didn't know about Cascade. She'd been shocked. You're a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, and they think you're unemployed. They think I'm barely employed, I'd corrected. There's a difference. Why don't you tell them? I'd considered it. But every time I imagined the conversation, I saw my father's skeptical expression, heard my mother's patronizing tone. That's nice, dear. Your brother just made partner at his firm. You remember Garrett, the successful one? Because, I'd told Rita, their narrative of who I am has nothing to do with reality. And I'm tired of fighting to be seen. Miss Ashford, the keys to your new home. The realtor handed me a leather folder containing the deed to my penthouse apartment. 45th floor. 4,500 square feet. Views of the entire Manhattan skyline through windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. Purchase price, $2.3 million, paid in cash. Congratulations, the realtor said warmly. In all my years, I've never worked with someone your age who could purchase a property like this outright. You must be very successful. I've had some good years, I said, understatement of the century. The penthouse was everything I'd never allowed myself to dream about growing up. Master suite with a spa bathroom. Chef's kitchen with appliances I barely knew how to use. Office with custom built-in shelving for the business books I'd collected. And those windows, God, those windows that made me feel like I was floating above a city that had once seemed impossible to conquer. I moved in on a Tuesday. My mother called that evening. Nora, honey, how's your apartment? It's great, Mom. Really nice. Still that little studio in Queens? I looked around my penthouse living room. Something like that. Well, you're young. Plenty of time to move up. Garrett just bought a condo in Connecticut, 3 bedrooms, beautiful property. Your father and I are so proud. He's really making something of himself. That's wonderful. Anyway, I'm calling about Thanksgiving. You're coming, right? It would mean so much to have both our children home, both children. As if I'd ever left, as if I wasn't always there when summoned, always playing my role as the lesser sibling. I'll be there, Mom. After she hung up, I walked to my windows and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my family believed I was struggling, barely making rent, living a small life in a small apartment. The truth was so much bigger than they could comprehend. And somehow, that made the loneliness worse. Thanksgiving at the Ashford estate was always a production. Crystal and china, expensive wine, relatives who'd flown in from 3 states. 50 people gathered to celebrate family and success, mostly Garrett's success. I arrived at noon, parking my Tesla in the circular driveway. Nice car, my cousin Derek said as I got out. Lease or finance? Neither, I said simply. He laughed. Right. Must be nice having parents who can help with that. I didn't correct him. Let him think what he wanted. Inside, the house smelled of roasted turkey and my mother's anxiety. She was always stressed during holidays, desperate to maintain the appearance of the perfect family. Nora! She air-kissed both my cheeks. You're here. Good. Can you help in the kitchen? We're running behind. Of course. Garrett never helped in the kitchen. I found him in the living room, surrounded by relatives, holding court about his latest investment banking deal. The client was skeptical at first, he was saying, but I showed them the projections, walked them through the risk assessment, and by the end, they doubled their initial investment commitment. Applause. Murmurs of admiration. That's our Garrett, my father said proudly. Always closing the deal. I slipped past them into the kitchen, where I spent the next 2 hours helping the caterers my mother had hired but pretended she hadn't. During dinner, my father stood to make a toast. I'm grateful for many things this year, he began, but mostly for family. For Patricia, my rock. For Garrett, who continues to exceed every expectation. He raised his glass toward my brother. 3 promotions in 5 years, son. That's remarkable. Everyone toasted. I sipped my wine, and of course, Nora. My father's gaze finally found me at the far end of the table. Who's still figuring things out? But that's okay. Not everyone finds their path early. We love you anyway, sweetheart. The pity in his voice made me want to scream. After dinner, my mother gathered us for the annual family photo. Professional photographer, perfectly styled, destined for their holiday cards. Garrett, you stand here with your father, she directed. Patricia, next to Warren. And Nora, you can stand, just there, yes, behind Patricia's shoulder. I looked at the photographer's camera and understood, I was being placed in the background. Literally. The photo that would go out on 200 holiday cards would show Warren and Patricia Ashford with their successful son Garrett prominently displayed. And somewhere in the background, if you looked closely, you might notice their daughter Nora. Blurred. Peripheral. Dismissible, that photo ended up on my parents' fireplace mantel. I saw it every time I visited. A visual representation of my place in the family hierarchy. What they didn't know, that same month, Cascade Analytics was featured in Forbes' 30 Under 30 list. My photo, clear, centered, captioned Tech Innovator, was being read by hundreds of thousands of people, but the Ashford family holiday card told a different story. Nora, we need you here this Saturday. 6 o'clock sharp. My father's voice on the phone had that tone, the one that meant attendance was mandatory, questions were unwelcome. What's the occasion? I asked, reviewing quarterly reports on my laptop. Family announcement. Important. Don't be late. He hung up before I could ask more. I stared at my phone, that familiar dread settling in my stomach. Family announcements were never good for me. They were stage productions where Garrett was the star and I was, what? The audience? The prop? Saturday arrived too quickly. I dressed carefully, navy silk dress, tasteful jewelry, armor disguised as elegance. The drive to Connecticut felt longer than usual, each mile a reminder that I was heading back into a world where I was perpetually less than. The house loomed as I pulled up. Imposing. Cold. My mother's art collection visible through the massive windows pieces she'd been told were valuable by dealers who saw her coming. Garrett's car was already there. BMW, newer model, probably leased despite his claims of success. Nora. My mother greeted me at the door. Finally. Your brother's been waiting. I'm 10 minutes early, Mom. Yes, well, punctuality means being prepared before the appointed time. She looked me over. That dress. Couldn't you have chosen something more feminine? You look like you're heading to a board meeting. I bit back the response, I have a board meeting Monday morning with executives who value my expertise. Instead, sorry, Mom. It's what I had. Garrett was in the dining room, looking smug in his expensive suit. He'd gained weight, the kind that comes from expense account dinners and desk jobs, little sister. He said, using the nickname I'd always hated. Still driving Japanese cars? Tesla's American, I corrected, keeping my voice light. Of course you'd split hairs. He swirled his scotch. Father wants to talk to me about something big tonight. finally moving me up to partner, I think, partner. At 32. I'd looked up his firm once, mid-tier investment bank, decent reputation, nothing spectacular. If he made partner, it would be because of the Ashford name, not his performance. That's great, Garrett, congratulations. He studied me. You're being unusually gracious. Why wouldn't I be happy for my brother? Because you've always been jealous of my success. I took a sip of the wine my mother had thrust into my hand. Jealous. If he only knew, dinner was the usual performance. My mother asked about my little tech job with a tone that suggested I worked retail. My father discussed market trends with Garrett, occasionally glancing at me as if surprised I hadn't excused myself. I pushed salmon around my plate and counted the minutes until I could leave. Then my father stood, tapping his wine glass with his knife. The room fell silent. I've asked you all here tonight because I'm making an investment in this family's future. He smiled at Garrett, and I saw something in that expression I'd never seen directed at me, unqualified approval. Garrett has developed a revolutionary approach to algorithmic trading. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Algorithmic trading. Garrett. The brother who'd mocked me for being a computer nerd throughout college had suddenly developed expertise in algorithms? And after extensive review of his methodology, I'm investing $10 million in his new hedge fund, Ashford Capital Management. The room exploded. My mother gasped with delight. Garrett's smirk transformed into a genuine grin. And my father, Warren Ashford, looked at his son with pride that could have lit the entire house. This is just the beginning, my father continued. With the right foundation, Garrett will build something that will carry the Ashford name for generations. He pulled out a check, an actual physical check, because Warren Ashford believed in theatrical gestures. $10 million. Written in my father's precise handwriting. He handed it to Garrett, who accepted it with practiced humility. Thank you, Father. I won't let you down. I know you won't, son. You're an Ashford. Success is in your blood. Then my father turned to me, his expression shifted. Not to anger or disappointment. To something worse, pity. Nora. He said my name like an apology. I know this must be difficult for you. Your brother has always been the gifted one. The room held its breath, but you should understand something. He paused, making sure every word landed. Some children are born to build empires. Others are born to watch silence. Complete, absolute silence. That's not a judgment, he continued, his voice gentle. It's simply an acknowledgement of natural ability. Garrett has the mind for high finance, for complex strategy. You. He trailed off, the unsaid words hanging between us. You have other qualities. You're kind. Reliable. Those matter too. My mother looked down at her plate. Garrett had the decency to look uncomfortable, though not uncomfortable enough to say anything. I set down my wineglass carefully. My hands were steady. Years of board meetings had taught me to control my reactions. That's very generous of you, Father. My voice was calm, pleasant even. I'm sure Garrett will put it to good use. My father looked surprised by my graciousness. I'm glad you understand, sweetheart. Not everyone is cut out for high finance. But that doesn't make you less valuable to this family. No, I agreed. Not everyone is cut out for high finance. I stayed for dessert. Made polite conversation about my mother's upcoming charity gala. Complimented the meal. Thanked them for including me in their announcement. At 9:30, I excused myself. Leaving so soon, my mother asked. We were going to have coffee in the living room. Early morning tomorrow, I said, which was true. I had a call with investors in Singapore. Of course. Your little job keeps you busy. I drove back to Manhattan, to my $2.3 million penthouse, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. My phone buzzed as I pulled into my building's garage. Text from Garrett, sorry about the Empire Builders comment. You know how Dad is. I stared at the message for a long moment, then I deleted it without responding. The courier arrived at my office on Tuesday morning. Miss Nora Ashford? That's me. Sign here, please. Confidential legal document. The envelope was thick, expensive paper, embossed with the logo of Henderson and Associates, a law firm I'd never heard of. Marked confidential attorney-client privilege in red letters. I waited until I was alone in my office to open it. The cover letter was brief. Dear Miss Ashford, per the instructions of the late Thomas Ashford, we are delivering this letter to you exactly 90 days following his death. The enclosed documents are for your eyes only and constitute attorney-client privileged communication. Please contact our office if you have questions. Sincerely, Robert Henderson, ESQ.my grandfather. Thomas Ashford had died 6 months ago, massive heart attack, quick and clean. The funeral had been huge, befitting a man who'd built an investment empire. I'd stood in the back row while my father accepted condolences and Garrett played the grieving grandson. I'd barely known my grandfather. He was always traveling, always busy, more myth than man in my childhood. But I remembered him as sharp, observant, and unlike my father, he'd never dismissed me with a sigh. With shaking hands, I pulled out the second envelope. The handwriting was spidery but firm. Dearest Nora, if you're reading this, I've been gone for 3 months. I hope that's been long enough for the vultures to finish picking over my estate and for the truth to settle into comfortable lies. I'm writing to you because you're the only one in this family who doesn't know how to lie to yourself. Your father does it constantly. He tells himself that his success is due to brilliance rather than my money and connections. Your brother has inherited that particular skill, but you, Nora, you've always seen things clearly. That's why I'm telling you something I should have told you years ago. None of your father's fortune is his. It's mine. My breath caught. Every dollar Warren Ashford claims to have earned through his genius in investment banking came from a trust fund I established. Every connection, every deal, every success, all of it funded and arranged by me. I watched him diminish you for years, and I said nothing. That is my greatest regret. I told myself I was respecting his parenting choices, but the truth is I was a coward. I should have intervened. I should have told you years ago that you were being gaslighted by a man who built his entire identity on my money. Ears blurred the words. I wiped my eyes and kept reading. Attached to this letter, you'll find 3 documents. First, a copy of the original trust agreement I established for your father. Note particularly Section 4(b), the clause requiring him to demonstrate financial acumen and responsibility to maintain access to the principal. Second, an audit of your father's actual investment performance over the last 20 years. Nora, without my intervention and money, he would have bankrupted himself at least 4 times. Every time he made a disastrous investment, I quietly covered the losses. His genius is a fiction I funded. Third, my revised will, filed 3 weeks before my death. I've left Warren enough to maintain his lifestyle, assuming he doesn't squander it, which he probably will. I've left Garrett nothing. He's young enough to earn his own fortune, though I suspect he lacks the character to do so, and I've left you everything else: the real estate holdings, the investment portfolios, the business interests, the liquid assets, approximately $43 million. I stopped breathing. $43 million, but there are conditions, Nora. You see, I've learned something in my 87 years. Money doesn't build character, but the lack of it reveals it. I want to see what kind of people your father and brother truly are when they don't have my fortune propping up their egos. The documents prove that Warren has violated the terms of the original trust. Reckless investments. Hidden losses. Maintained reputation through deception. With these documents, you can challenge his access to the trust's remaining funds, approximately $18 million. I'm giving you a choice. You can use these documents to expose your father and brother for what they are. Or you can stay silent and let them continue their performance. But before you decide, I want you to know something. I've been watching you, Nora. I know about Cascade Analytics. I know about your success. And I want you to know that I see you, truly see you, in a way your father never has. You were never the dumb one. You were always the smart one. You were smart enough to build something real while they built something imaginary. The choice is yours. With love and pride, Grandfather. I read the letter 3 times. Then I opened the documents. Everything my grandfather claimed was there. Meticulously documented. Bank statements showing my father's failures. Trust agreements showing the conditions he'd violated. Audit reports proving that Warren Ashford's career was built on his father's money and the will. Probated. Executed. Legal. $43 million. Already transferred to accounts in my name. I sat in my office as the sun set over Manhattan, the city lights beginning to glow, and thought about choices, about the dinner party 3 days ago where my father had called me a watcher while handing Garrett $10 million. About 29 years of being dismissed, diminished, erased. About the algorithm that had launched my career, the one I'd mentioned to Garrett 2 years ago in a moment of desperate longing for family connection. The one he'd stolen. I picked up my phone and made a call. Rita? I need you to do something for me. Contact our forensic technology analyst. I need a complete audit of some source code. Miss Ashford, you need to see this. David Martinez, our forensic technology analyst, spread 3 monitors across my conference table. Code filled each screen, lines of algorithms, timestamps, development markers. This is your original algorithm, he said, pointing to the left screen. The one you developed 2 years ago for Cascade's proprietary trading analysis module. I leaned forward. The code was mine. I recognized my signature problem-solving approach, the elegant way I'd structured the data flows, and this, David continued, pulling up the middle screen, is the algorithm your brother submitted to the SEC filing for Ashford Capital Management. The similarities were immediate. Not just similar, identical in key sections. Did he copied it? I said flatly, not exactly. David highlighted several passages. He copied about 60% of it. But here's where it gets interesting, he removed or simplified the most complex components. The ones that make your algorithm actually work. Show me. David walked me through it. Garrett had taken my predictive modeling framework but stripped out the machine learning components that allowed it to adapt to market changes. He'd kept the data processing structure but removed the error correction protocols that prevented catastrophic miscalculations. It's like, David said, searching for an analogy, he photocopied a blueprint for a bridge but left out the load-bearing calculations. It looks impressive, but structurally? It'll collapse under any real pressure. Can you prove he took it from my code? Absolutely. Look at this. David zoomed in on a specific section. See this comment embedded in the code? NA optimization patch 3.2 foot, NA are your initials. Your brother didn't even bother removing your development notes. I stared at the screen. He kept my initials in the stolen code. There's more. David pulled up a series of emails. I accessed the metadata on the files he submitted to the SEC. The original creation date is 18 months ago, exactly 2 weeks after you had that phone call with him. Remember? You mentioned it in your initial request. I remembered. I'd been so lonely, so desperate for family connection. Garrett had called, unusually friendly, asking about my work. For once, he seemed genuinely interested. Tell me about this algorithm you're working on, he'd said. The trading analysis one. How does it work? And I'd told him. Every detail. Because for 30 minutes, my brother had made me feel like I mattered. Can you document all of this? I asked David, already done. Full report, timeline, side-by-side code comparison, metadata analysis. It's airtight, Miss Ashford. If you wanted to file charges for intellectual property theft. Not yet, I interrupted. First, I need to show someone. I waited until Thursday evening. Garrett would be at my parents' house. He had dinner there every Thursday, the dutiful son maintaining family connections. I dialed my father's number. Nora? He sounded surprised. I never called. Is everything all right? I need to come by. Tomorrow. There's something we need to discuss as a family. Silence. Then, carefully, what kind of discussion? About Garrett's hedge fund. About the algorithm he's using. About where it actually came from. More silence. Nora, if this is about the dinner last Saturday, your mother, and I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, tomorrow, I repeated. 7 o'clock. Make sure Garrett's there. I hung up before he could respond. My phone rang immediately. I ignored it. It rang 4 more times, father, mother, Garrett, father again before the voicemails started piling up. I listened to Garrett's. Nora, what's this about? If you're upset about Dad's investment, we can talk about it. Don't make this weird. Don't make this weird. As if I was the one making things weird, I texted back a single message, see you tomorrow at 7. I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 7 o'clock. My car trunk held 3 things: my laptop, a folder of documents from my grandfather's attorney, and David's forensic analysis report. My father opened the door. He looked older than he had last Saturday. Tired. Nora, come in. We're in the study. Of course. The study. Where every important family conversation happened, where I'd been lectured about realistic expectations, where Garrett had been praised for achievements I now knew were stolen. My mother sat in the corner, wringing her hands. Garrett sprawled in the leather chair by the window, trying to look casual but failing. His leg bounced nervously. Well, my father said, closing the door behind me. We're here. What's this about? I set my laptop on his desk. It's about Garrett's revolutionary algorithm. The one you're investing $10 million in. Garrett's leg stopped bouncing. What about it? My father asked. I opened my laptop and connected it to the large television mounted on the wall, the same TV my father used to review market data and give Garrett impromptu business lessons while I was growing up. Let me show you something. For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through it. First, I showed them my original algorithm. The development timeline. The dates. The complexity of the coding. This is what I built 2 years ago, I said, my voice steady. For Cascade Analytics. It's proprietary technology that forms the basis of our trading analysis module. My father squinted at the screen. Nora, I don't understand what this has to do with watch. I pulled up Garrett's version. Side by side with mine, the room went completely silent as the similarities became obvious. Even my father, who knew nothing about coding, could see the identical structures. That's quite a coincidence, my father said slowly. It's not a coincidence. I highlighted the sections David had marked. Garrett copied 60% of my code. But he didn't understand it well enough to copy the parts that actually make it functional. I turned to Garrett. His face had gone white. Want to explain this, brother? I don't have to explain anything, he said, but his voice cracked. You shared that information with me. If you were dumb enough to just hand over your work, so you admit you took it? I admit nothing. You talked about your little project, and I was inspired to develop something similar. That's not theft, that's collaboration. Collaboration requires consent. I pulled up the next screen. These are the emails you sent to potential investors. Want me to read them out loud? Garrett stood up. Father, this is absurd. She's trying to sabotage my fund because she's jealous. My sister had a basic idea, I read from the email on screen. But she lacked the sophistication to develop it into something actually useful. I've refined her amateur concept into a professional-grade trading system. My mother gasped. She's not sophisticated enough to understand what I've built from her simple foundation. I looked up at Garrett. Your words. To Richard Pemberton at Mercer Investments. Should I continue? Those emails are private, they're evidence. I clicked to the next screen. Here's the metadata on your SEC filing. The original creation date of your algorithm is April 15th, 2 years ago. Exactly 14 days after our phone call where I explained my entire methodology to you. You can't prove, I can prove everything. I pulled up David's report. This is a forensic analysis by a certified technology expert. Every line of code traced. Every timestamp documented. And here's my favorite part: you left my initials in the development notes. NA Optimization Patch 3.2. Nora Ashford. You literally copied my code so carelessly you didn't even remove my signature. Garrett sat down heavily. My father was staring at the screen, his face cycling through confusion, understanding, and finally something that looked like horror. Garrett, he said quietly. Is this true? She shared it with me. Garrett's voice rose. I didn't steal anything. She was bragging about her little computer project, and I listened. That's not tell father how you described me to your colleagues, I interrupted. The ones you've been pitching this fund to. Go ahead. Tell him about your simple sister with her basic ideas. Garrett's jaw tightened. I was selling the fund. You have to differentiate your product. By stealing mine? It's not stealing if the person you take from is too stupid to matter. The words hung in the air. My father's expression shifted to something I'd never seen before. Not disappointment. Disgust. Garrett, he said slowly. What have you done? Before we continue discussing Garrett's theft, I said, reaching for the second folder, we should probably address yours, father. I handed him the documents from my grandfather's attorney. My father opened the folder. I watched his hands start to shake as he read the first page. What is this? His voice was barely a whisper. The trust agreement your father established for you. The one that funded your entire career. He flipped to the second document. The audit. No, he breathed. This can't be real? Legal? True? I supplied. It's all free. Grandfather hired forensic accountants to audit your actual investment performance. Every trade, every decision, every brilliant move you've made in 30 years, I leaned against the desk. Without his money and intervention, you would have bankrupted yourself 4 times. Every major loss was covered by him. Every successful deal was arranged through his connections. Your genius is fiction. He funded. My mother stood up, moving closer to read over my father's shoulder. Her hand flew to her mouth. The third document is grandfather's revised will. Filed 3 weeks before he died. My father's face had lost all color. He left you enough to maintain your lifestyle, assuming you don't squander it. I paused. He left Garrett nothing. Garrett jerked upright. What? Grandfather's exact words were he's young enough to earn his own fortune, though I suspect he lacks the character to do so. And you? My father asked, his voice hollow. What did he leave you? Everything else. The real estate holdings. The investment portfolios. The business interests. I let them sit with that for a moment. $43 million. My mother made a sound like all the air had been punched from her lungs. That's impossible, Garrett said. You're lying. Grandfather wouldn't. The will has been probated and executed. The money's already in my accounts. The real estate has been transferred. I turned to my father. And your access to the trust fund, the remaining $18 million, can be challenged based on the violations documented in that audit. My father looked at me like he'd never seen me before. You've known about this since Tuesday. 3 days after you told me I was born to watch while empire builders like you and Garrett accomplish things. Nora, do you know what's really extraordinary about all of this? I kept my voice conversational. I didn't need grandfather's money. I built something real while you both built something imaginary. I pulled up one more screen on the television. My company's financial statements, Cascade Analytics. That's my company. The one you thought was a hobby. Last year's revenue, $32 million. This year we're projecting $45 million. 50 employees across 3 locations. Contracts with Fortune 500 companies you couldn't even get meetings with. I looked at my father. Everything you thought you knew about me was wrong. I'm not the dumb one. I never was. I was just smart enough to build my empire while you were busy pretending to build yours. The silence was absolute. Why are you here? My father finally asked. If you have all this evidence, all this money, why come here at all? Because grandfather gave me a choice. And now I'm giving you one. Garrett found his voice. What kind of choice? You can continue living the life you've built on lies. Keep the $10 million, father. Launch your fund, Garrett. Pretend this conversation never happened. In exchange for what? My father asked. The truth. Public acknowledgement of who I am and what I've built. Admission that your entire narrative about the smart son and the struggling daughter was wrong. And complete severance. I never want to see either of you again. You can't be serious, Garrett said. You'd really destroy our reputation over being called stupid for 29 years? Over watching you steal my work and get rewarded for it? Over being told I was born to watch? My voice stayed level. Yes, Garrett. I would. That will destroy us, my father said quietly. Yes. Just like you destroyed me for 29 years. The difference is, my reputation was built on lies. Yours is about to be dead. I closed my laptop. Or you can refuse. And I'll release everything to the press, Garrett's theft, your fraudulent career, all of it. Plus, I'll file the trust violation challenge. You'll lose the remaining $18 million, your reputations, and any credibility you have left in the business community. My mother spoke for the first time. Nora, please. This is your family. Family doesn't treat each other like servants. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't spend 30 years making someone feel worthless. I moved toward the door. You have 6 days. Next Friday is Mother's Charity Gala. Both of you will stand up in front of all your friends and colleagues and tell the truth. Every detail. Cascade Analytics. My success. Garrett's theft. The origin of father's wealth. Everything. That's impossible, Garrett said. We'll be laughed out of Connecticut, then I suggest you start packing for California. Because if you're not at that podium next Friday telling the truth, I'll make sure every business publication in the country has this story by Saturday morning. I opened the door, then paused. By the way, Father. About that comment you made at dinner. Some children are born to build empires, others are born to watch? He looked at me, broken. You were right. You and Garrett were born to watch. I smiled. And I was born to build. I walked out of that house into the cool October evening. My phone was already buzzing with calls. Father, Mother, Garrett cycling through again. I ignored them all. Instead, I called Rita. It's done, I said. They have 6 days to decide. How do you feel? I looked back at the house. Lights blazing in the study window. Shadows moving behind the curtains. My family in crisis, trying to figure out how the dumb daughter had just dismantled their entire world. Powerful, I said honestly. For the first time in my life, I feel powerful. Good. Because you are. You always were. They just couldn't see it. I drove back to Manhattan, to my penthouse, to my empire built in silence. Behind me, the Ashford family was learning a hard truth: the person you underestimate is often the one who defeats you. And sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's simply revealing the truth. The countdown had begun. In Connecticut, my father and brother were making their choice. In Manhattan, I was preparing for either outcome, but I already knew which way this would go. They'd spent 30 years protecting their reputation. They'd do anything to maintain it, even tell the truth. Sometimes the hardest thing for liars to do is face what they've been running from. And next Friday, in front of 300 witnesses, Warren and Garrett Ashford would run straight into it. Father called 17 times in the first 24 hours. I answered none of them. Garrett texted, "We need to talk. This is insane. You're destroying the family over nothing. Over nothing. 29 years of dismissal was nothing. Stolen intellectual property was nothing. A lifetime of being erased was nothing." I didn't respond. On Tuesday, my mother left a voicemail. Her voice was shaking. "Nora, please. Your father hasn't slept. Garrett's been, well, he's very upset. Can't we work something out privately? Does this have to be so public?" Think about what this will do to the family name. The family name. Always the family named. I saved the voicemail but didn't call back. Wednesday brought an email from my father's lawyer. Legal threats wrapped in professional language, defamation, extortion, coercion. I forwarded it to my own attorney, who called me within the hour. Miss Ashford, they have no case. The evidence you have is documented fact. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. And you haven't demanded money, just honesty. They're desperate. Good, I said. Thursday evening, my mother showed up at my office building. Security called up. Miss Ashford, there's a Patricia Ashford here to see you. She says she's your mother. I almost told them to send her away. But something made me pause. Send her up. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older. The carefully maintained facade cracking under stress. Nora. She stood in my office doorway, taking in the space in the Manhattan skyline visible through my windows, the expensive furnishings, the wall of awards and featured articles. This is really your company? Yes, Mother. This is really my company. She walked slowly around the room, studying everything like she was seeing me for the first time. Maybe she was. I had no idea, she whispered. You never asked. Would you have told us? I considered lying. But what was the point? No. Because every time I mentioned anything about my work, you dismissed it. So I stopped trying. She sank into one of my leather chairs. Your father and Garrett are planning to do it. The confession at the gala. They spent yesterday drafting what they'll say. I know. How do you know? I gestured to my computer. Garrett emailed me his draft speech. Wanted my approval. I pulled it up on screen. Let me read you a section. While there may have been some unintentional overlap between my sister's amateur coding project and my proprietary algorithm, I want to set the record straight about her accomplishments, which, though modest, deserve acknowledgement. My mother closed her eyes. That he's still trying to minimize what he did, I said. Still calling my company an amateur project while asking for forgiveness. That's not truth. That's damage control. What do you want them to say? Everything. The stolen code. Father's fake career. My actual success. No spin. No softening. The truth. She was quiet for a long moment. This will destroy them. They destroyed me first. The difference is, I rebuilt myself. Let's see if they can do the same. My mother stood, walked to the window. I've been a coward, Nora. For 30 years. I watched your father treat you like you were less than Garrett, and I said nothing. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but really I was just taking the easy path. She turned to face me. I'm going to say something tomorrow night too. At the gala. Before your father and Garrett speak, what are you going to say? That I'm proud of you. That I should have said it 29 years ago. And that I'm sorry I let you grow up thinking you weren't enough. Her voice cracked. Because you were always enough, Nora. More than enough. I just didn't have the courage to say it. For the first time in years, I felt something soften toward her. Thank you, I said quietly. She left without another word. The grand ballroom at the Connecticut Royal Hotel glittered with wealth and privilege. 300 guests, Connecticut's business elite, philanthropists, society figures, gathered for my mother's annual literacy charity event. I arrived at 7 wearing a dress that cost more than my father's first car. Hair perfect. Makeup flawless. The armor of success worn proudly. My father and Garrett stood near the podium, both looking like condemned men. My mother, surprisingly, stood near the entrance waiting for me. Thank you for coming, she said. Did you think I'd miss this? Part of me hoped you would. Make this easier on them. They didn't make anything easier on me for 29 years, she nodded. Fair enough. The ballroom buzzed with conversation. I caught fragments as I moved through the crowd. That's Nora Ashford. The daughter, I heard she's some kind of tech person? Never amounts to much, from what Patricia says. I smiled at each comment, knowing what was coming. At 8 o'clock, my mother took the podium. Good evening, everyone. My mother's voice was steady. Thank you all for being here tonight to support childhood literacy. But before we discuss the Foundation's work, I need to say something personal. The room quieted. For 30 years, I've presented our family as perfect. The successful banker husband. The brilliant son. The struggling daughter. She looked directly at me. That narrative was a lie. Not the struggling part, the part where I made my daughter believe she was struggling. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My daughter Nora isn't struggling. She never was. She's the CEO and founder of Cascade Analytics, a company that generated $32 million in revenue last year. She built it without a penny from us, without our connections, without our help. And I never once told her I was proud. The room went silent. I'm telling her now. Nora, I'm proud of you. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. And I'm sorry I let you believe you were anything less than extraordinary. She stepped back from the podium, tears on her cheeks. My father stood slowly. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 6 days. My name is Warren Ashford. His voice was rough. Most of you know me as a successful investment banker. Someone who built a fortune through smart decisions and calculated risks. He gripped the podium. That's not true. My father, Thomas Ashford, funded my entire career. Every dollar I claimed to earn came from a trust fund he established. Every connection, every deal, every success, all arranged or funded by him. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. An audit of my actual investment performance shows that without his intervention, I would have bankrupted myself multiple times. My reputation as a financial genius is built on his money and my lies. Someone in the back whispered loudly enough to hear. Oh my God! 3 weeks before he died, my father changed his will. He left me enough to maintain my lifestyle. He left my son Garrett nothing. And he left everything else, $43 million, to my daughter Nora. The whispers grew louder, not because she needed it. She didn't. But because he knew she'd actually earned the right to inherit his empire. While I was pretending to build mine, she was actually building hers. My father's hands shook. For 29 years, I told my daughter she wasn't smart enough. Told her she was born to watch while others built empires. I was wrong. She was born to build. And I was born to. He trailed off. To inherit and squander someone else's vision. He stepped back from the podium. My brother stood. He looked younger somehow, stripped of the confidence that had always defined him. I stole from my sister. No preamble. No softening. 2 years ago, she told me about an algorithm she'd developed. She shared it because I asked, because I pretended to be interested in her work. I copied it, claimed it as my own, and convinced our father to invest $10 million in a hedge fund based on stolen technology. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. I called her simple. Amateur. Unsophisticated. I told investors that I'd refined her basic idea into something useful. The truth is, I didn't understand her work well enough to even copy it correctly. The algorithm I submitted to the SEC doesn't work without the components I was too ignorant to know I needed. He looked at me for the first time. My sister built a multi-million-dollar company while I built a career on our father's money and her stolen work. She's brilliant. I'm a fraud. And I'm sorry. He sat down. I sat in my new office, the penthouse suite of the building I'd purchased in Manhattan, reading the Forbes profile. Nora Ashford built her empire in the shadows while her family dismissed her as the dumb one. Today, Cascade Analytics is valued at $80 million and climbing. But Ashford's story isn't just about business success, it's about the courage to define yourself when others refuse to see you. The article included quotes from the charity gala confession. It had been recorded by at least a dozen phones, shared across social media, picked up by business publications nationwide. The Ashford family name was indeed destroyed. But not my part of it. My phone buzzed. Text from my mother, lunch next week? Just the two of us, I smiled and replied. I'd like that. My father and Garrett had moved to California. The 10 million was gone. The stolen algorithm had failed spectacularly once investors realized it didn't work. Ashford Capital Management dissolved before it ever launched. My father's firm had quietly asked him to retire. Garrett couldn't find work in finance anywhere. I'd offered them nothing. No money. No help. No redemption beyond the truth they'd finally told. That was grandfather's final gift to me, the freedom to let them fail on their own terms. My assistant knocked on my door. Miss Ashford, the Forbes photographer is here for your 40 under 40 cover shoot. Cover shoot. For Forbes. The woman my family had called stupid was about to be on the cover of America's most prestigious business magazine. I walked to my windows, looking out over the city I'd conquered in silence. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's truth. Sometimes the best victory is simply being seen, and sometimes, the empire you build in silence speaks louder than any lie ever could. I was never the dumb one, I was always the smart one. It just took them 29 years to notice, but it only took me 29 seconds to stop caring what they thought. If you've ever been underestimated by people who should have known better, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Because I want you to know something, your worth is not determined by people who refuse to see it. You're not obligated to stay small so others can feel big. You don't need anyone's permission to succeed, and you definitely don't need to prove yourself to people who've already decided you're not enough. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that sometimes the best response to being underestimated is simply succeeding exactly as yourself. Subscribe to Revenge with Alice for more stories about standing your ground, setting boundaries, and choosing yourself when family tries to diminish you. Drop "I see my worth" in the comments if you're ready to stop letting others define your value. And remember, the empire you build in silence is always more solid than the one built on lies. Some children are born to build empires. Others are born to watch, but the real question is, who gets to decide which one you are? I decided I was a builder. What will you decide? I'm Nora Ashford, reminding you that your success doesn't require anyone else's approval. Know your worth, then build your empire.